Hello, MotoAmerica fans. Welcome to, it's got to be like the 225th episode of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. We've obviously been doing it a while. We do it every week. And the podcast is MotoAmerica's podcast with myself, Paul Carruthers, and Sean. Sean is out in Ohio. I'm in California. We no longer talk about the weather, so I don't know if he's cold or he's hot. I don't really care. He doesn't care. We're done with weather. Sean, how are you today? How are you today?
We have such a complex about that now, Paul. We actually, we think about it every time in the beginning now. I'm doing well. Well, it is windy here. Okay, I better not say that. But anyway, it's all good. But no, I'm looking forward to this one. This is going to be a cool one. We got a great guest on today. But man, it's funny because this weekend I think is the Daytona 500, right?
Yes.
And it's so weird how ours follows up so quickly right after that. I know it's a couple of weeks, but it really, once that the cars are out there, it really kind of drives that home that we're going to be there soon. So, looking forward to that. That's going to be great.
Yeah, it makes it a little difficult because obviously the 500 is such a huge event for them. And then they had the 24-hour. So we kind of lose a little bit of touch with them, which I totally understand because I can't imagine how busy they would be, dealing with those two big events. But then next week, I have a feeling we're just going to get bombarded with everything, and we can start to really get the thing going. So I'm looking forward to that. And we've got Brandon Posh is going to go to the 500 with the help of the Speedway and do a little pre-event media stuff for us, which will work out really nice. Obviously, Brandon's the right guy to do it because he's won the last two Daytona 200s and he's well-spoken and hungry and, wants to go attack that. He doesn't have a ride yet beyond Daytona. So obviously he's, hopefully this helps him as much as it helps us. So.
Yeah. Maybe he'll press some flesh down there and get some of those car teams to toss him some funds for a team or something.
There you go. He's good with stuff like that, so I'm happy we were able to make that happen. And he's just
that's really good.
Yeah, he'll be down there this weekend, and we'll see what we get out of it. But well, let's get started with today because, like you mentioned, I'm kind of excited for this too because usually we don't have anybody on the show that's smarter than us, but today that streak is going to be broken because this guy is. Well, anyway, Jason Kehl. And it's also cool because he let us know that it's pronounced kale like the salad. I wish my name was something that I could revert to on that. But you can say, well, it rhymes with nice or sounds like nice or
right. Yeah. People do that a lot with me. Yeah, they'll do that. Yep.
Yeah, try that with Carruthers.
Yeah, that would be hard even for Dr. What's his name? Seuss. It'd be hard for even Dr. Seuss to rhyme something with Carruthers, I think.
Yeah, it's impossible.
If I had my brothers, it would be Paul Carruthers.
Well, anyway, there you go. Well, anyway, Jason Kehl is the team principal for the Harley-Davidson Screaming Eagle team. In our Mission King of the Baggers championship. They won the title in 2021 with Kyle Wyman, and they came so close to winning it again last year with Travis Wyman. They have both those guys back for 2023, and it's cool. I saw some photos and video, and it's cool. It's like it's just old school Harley-Davidson to me when I see that orange and black. It's like that's just like as a kid growing up and I was I was very heavily into dirt track with Kenny Roberts and all that. But I always remember the Harley team with the orange and black. It was like, if you wore that orange and black, you were a factory Harley-Davidson rider. And I don't know who made the decision to go to that this year, but it's perfect. I mean, it's what they need to be. So anyway, and then I was obviously reading up on Jason before the podcast. Man, it kind of gave me a headache just trying to read that because the guy has done so much. I mean, it's everything from dialysis machines to cruise missiles and now to King of the Baggers. So we can bring Jason in now and get started with him. But Jason, welcome to the show and thanks so much for taking some time out of what I'm sure is a busy time for you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on. It's exciting to be part of the podcast, and I've seen or listened to so many people come through here. It's an honor to be on with you guys and excited to talk about Harley-Davidson and the racing program and where we've been and where we're going. So
Well, why don't you start with, obviously your background is too much to talk about on here, but why don't you just tell us kind of what led to Harley-Davidson, how long you've been at Harley-Davidson, and that part of your career at least.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of great things in my career, but they've all been within product development, and that's really where my passion lies in developing product from growing up as a kid, always having a wrench in the hand, or as our import mechanic would say it, a spanner in the hand, I guess. Learning some new terms here, being on the race team, that's for sure. I'm not going to go all Giacchetto on you here with some of the terms that I've used, but we'll have some fun. Yeah, motorcycles have been a part of my life ever since I was a kid at different levels, and certainly you go through different phases in life. And I think that's a common story with people in motorcycles about when they ride them or when they've been part of their life or what they mean. But I remember as a kid looking through an old photo album, and I found this old photo album of my great grandfather at the time, and he was sitting on a Harley-Davidson. I later learned that was a 1920 Harley coming from St. Paul, Minnesota. He met a young woman in Chicago, Illinois, and he used to ride that motorcycle on the weekends during his courtship, I guess you could say. But it was Highway 12 at the time, so if you imagine no paved roads, but US Highway 12 connecting Chicago and St. Paul, and he took that Harley all the way down, back and forth. So it's one of those things that register in my mind as a kid growing up, and what motorcycles mean. And I guess in some ways, motorcycles are the reason that I exist. If that didn't happen, if he wasn't able to make that commute at the time. So as I developed through my career, I got a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Wisconsin. Proud graduate. A few years later than William Harley when he graduated in 1907, but a UWME graduate. And growing up in the Milwaukee area, certainly Harley has a reputation. And as I progressed through my career, I ultimately wanted to wind up back at a place that had action in terms of development and people that work there, and a brand that represented what I did in my spare time and what I'd like to wrench on in the garage. So I ultimately wound up back at Harley-Davidson, and happy to be there. It's been a wild ride since 2017 when I joined the company, and it's a privilege to represent William, but certainly our founders, Arthur, Walter, and Bill, and celebrate 120 years here in 2023.
Jason, so no surprise that you're what do you call it? You're a Scani, right? Is that what they call you guys?
Yeah, I guess that's what they call us now. I don't know. It started popping up on T-shirts all the time. Wisconsin was the original one, Scani. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny. I live in Columbus, and not originally, so I'm only kind of a casual Ohio State fan. I'm more of a Syracuse fan, but we always hear about Wisconsin in this area and that school, and especially when we go up to your area and talk to people and ask them where they went to school, and that's an excellent school for a lot of things. It's interesting that you ended up getting a master's degree at University of Arizona. Is that right? And how did that happen?
Yeah, so I was dating a girl at the time when I graduated college. Yeah, and we moved to New York City actually after college, and I worked there for a while, and she was pursuing some things within the city. We wound up. She had some family that lived in Tucson at the time, and there was a big company in Tucson called Raytheon Missile Systems. There's 13,000 employees at the time, about 11,000 engineers, I think. So we moved all the way across the country down to Southern Arizona to work for a company down there, the company Raytheon Missile Systems, and continue in my career at the time. But it was for family and for a girl. That's where it is. So I earned my master's degree at the University of Arizona while working in Tucson.
That's cool. Yeah, Raytheon, when I lived in New England, Raytheon is obviously, I think they're still big in Massachusetts.
Sure, yes, big plants.
Yeah, remember hearing about those guys. But you're native to Wisconsin, so did you grow up knowing about the heritage of Harley?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in a small town called East Troy, which if you're familiar with Harley history, you'll know that there was a motorcycle manufacturer named Buell that was located in East Troy. So I grew up just down the road from Buell. So I mean, between Eric doing his thing at the time and Harley being located in Milwaukee, I mean, you're surrounded by motorcycles all the time. You couldn't be outside on a nice summer afternoon without the rumble of Harley V twins coming down the road. It was a special environment to grow up in. You couldn't go to a 4th of July parade without Eric's guys doing burnouts main street town. So certainly motorcycles were around. I don't know if it's still true, but at the time, Wisconsin motorcycle ownership per capita was the highest in the state. I think California had the highest total number of motorcycles, but per capita, Wisconsin it's been right up there.
So I've said this a few times on the podcast with regard to baggers or even King of the Baggers. And it's, my whole life, I started out on, I guess, UJMs, those Universal Japanese Motorcycles, which are standard upright. And I've always been oriented more towards sport bikes than anything. But I've never really owned a cruiser. I've ridden a couple of them. And I've mentioned in the past, I just always feel like I'm not comfortable with my feet in front of me. I guess it feels like I can't do a U-turn. I can't turn around. And, we've talked to Kyle and Travis about this. I think I've even mentioned this on that Q&A thing, Jason, that you are a part of, that we do at the track, that, the ergonomics are a little bit different for me, but, for sure, performance baggers, and certainly what's going on with King of the Baggers, they are a very sport bike type of a thing. But how did you transition from working for Harley into, I guess, this idea of, quote, performance baggers? And performance baggers has been a category that has existed for several years, correct?
Yeah, it's been around for a while, and it's been a trend that's been growing. It's funny that you mentioned UJMs. My very first motorcycle was a 1975 Honda 750 Super Sport.
Oh, perfect.
It was actually my dad's motorcycle, and he challenged me when I was 14 years old. I used to go out in the garage and sit on it because he parked it like a lot of people when they start having kids. It sat out there in the barn. I used to go sit on it and make motorcycle noises and twist the throttle and drain the battery, and he'd always get mad. But it never ran. So he challenged me when I was 14. He said, well, if you can get it running, we'll split the money, we'll sell it. Okay, well, I got it running pretty quickly, right? And we didn't split the money. I rode it for years and years after that. But that was my first motorcycle. A hand-me-down from my dad.
That's
and
cool.
Most of the motorcycles, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just wanted to tell you, I got to tell you this. My first motorcycle was a 1975 Yamaha RD350, which I still own, by the way. It's in my garage. But anyway, I digress.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we still owned that motorcycle. I did end up selling it years later, but that girl I was talking about, who's my wife,
that girl,
wonderful, supportive woman, yes. When we moved to New York, I sold that motor. I sold everything that I owned to be able to move out to New York City as a Scotty, moving out to the big city. And I sold that motorcycle. I regret it every day, having that history with us. But performance baggers, yes, it's funny that you mentioned being uncomfortable. I mean, I had never, before I joined Harley-Davidson, I never spent a significant amount of time on touring motorcycles, our Grand American touring bikes, as we call it now, all the way from the Road King up to a fully loaded limited with tour pack, until I had the opportunity to ride out to Sturgis. And we had just launched the Milwaukee 8 engines at the time, and I got a company-owned vehicle and headed out from Milwaukee out to Sturgis. And I rode that motorcycle all the way. And I remember thinking at the time, like, okay, this is pretty comfortable. This could do this, click off miles. It's pretty fun. Watch the horizon across the plains. And then we got to Sturgis, and when we stay in Rapid City if you're working the rally. So every morning you get up and ride from Rapid City into Sturgis itself, and you can take the back roads, which are really fun, beautiful roads to go out and ride. And I had that big laden limited tour pack, the new Milwaukee 8 engine. Get up every morning while everybody's still hungover and in their tents, I think, and the roads are wide open, and ride that touring bike for an hour in the twisties. And I couldn't believe how stable and fun that motorcycle was to me. And that was my eyes wide open moment for really how great the Harley-Davidson touring platform is and what it is capable of being. And I came back from that event and was like, we need to do more performance product. Working in parts and accessories at the time, which I've worked in since joining the company, but we have the opportunity to do a lot of performance product and make our motorcycles, our base motorcycles better. And I've been on that performance trend, I guess you could say, ever since. But how do we take this motorcycle? I wound up pushing so hard and trying to get so many things through the company. Actually, I went out and built my own. When I couldn't get the company to build a performance bagger, I went out and built my own just so that I could park it in front of 3700 Juneau Avenue when I come to work and be like, see, this is what we can do.
So how difficult was it? Like I mentioned earlier about Harley-Davidson, as long as I can remember, they were involved in racing in some way, and the majority of that has always been with, you know, flat track racing. But how did you get them, or were you involved in actually talking whoever it was you had to talk into the fact that going baggers racing was a good idea? And was that difficult or was it easy?
Yes, both, I think. There were difficult elements to it, and in the end, it was pretty easy, I would say. You know, the story, origin story, if you will, at Harley, we've raced ever since the beginning. We have well over 100 years and 120 years of racing lineage. And if you look back through that lineage of all the different ways that Harley-Davidson has participated in racing over the years, I mean, there's land speed, so flat track, board track, AMA Pro street racing, NHRA, every type of motorcycle racing there is, Harley has participated in at some point. And being in the role that I was in, we heard this rumor about this race that was going to happen out in California. And certainly the performance bagger trend is credited to, I would say, the aftermarket, who, like me, I would say, recognized the potential of the touring platform. And all these aftermarket companies started building performance parts for Harley-Davidson. That was the genesis of that first race out in Seika. I wanted to be part of it at the time. When I learned about it, we pushed it pretty hard. But as corporate structures work, you have annual budgets and money's allocated. And so when you learn about something during the same calendar year, sometimes it's tough to get it approved. So we started a skunk works project, if you will, off to the side to develop this performance bagger. But ultimately, that was the year of COVID. In 2020, budgets got cut and things got put on hold. But when the company saw the potential of what this trend could be with that first event out of Laguna Seca, was a much better sell or easier sell internally going forward. So certainly we had done some lead work. We had a spec for a motorcycle that we wanted to build. And it was the beginning of 2021, end of 2020. And we had just got a new CEO, a CEO by the name of Jochen Zeitz, who came into Harley-Davidson and pitched a HD #1 culture, we called it. That's getting back to winning. And winning means a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily just mean winning on the racetrack, but this played into, hey, we're going to compete to win. And we made a pitch to the CEO at the time. When I say we, our marketing partners were a huge part of that. Marketing corporations, I think, struggle between what is the value of racing sometimes, showing that value, both from a marketing standpoint and a product development standpoint. I think that's why this class is so special. But marketing was able to pitch to the CEO that we had some funds available and that we could start a program internally. And Jochen's question back was, can we win? The response back was yes. And his response was HD #1. And that was the approval to go build a bike and participate in that first full year of MotoAmerica 2021.
We all know the rivalry with Indian is real. I mean, you can see it at the races, and I can imagine you can see it elsewhere.
It's genuine, yes.
Yeah. So I would have just gone in there and started throwing the I word around, like, well, Indians doing this and Indians doing that, and I would think it'd be like taking candy from a baby at that point.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we participate in the series just to compete against Indian. We participate in the series for what it means to Harley-Davidson customers and what it means to our product development, what it means to our brand, and the brand story that is a genuine brand story with Harley-Davidson. And it is genuine, and you don't last for 120 years as any type of company without that authenticity. And we're participating to win. Obviously, the rivalry helps. We want to beat that team just as much as they want to beat us. So it adds a certain level to it. But when we're focused at the racetrack on what we can control, and that's how Harley-Davidson shows up, and that we represent the founders in the way that they created the company and the attitude that they had about improving the bike and building the best bikes in the world. That's really what we're focused on.
Jason, tell us about, so we talked to Kyle a little bit about you being on here. Actually, he helped facilitate this a little bit. And one of the things Kyle said to me is, make sure you talk with Jason about the whole thing with regard to, how Kyle and then Travis got involved in the program. And, my understanding, well, at least my thought on it was, I grew up in New York State, northern, a little far from Rochester, but I had relatives in that area and knew they live near Macedon, which is where Harv's Harley-Davidson is located. And we've mentioned this before. It's the family dealership for the Wymans. His Kyle's and Travis and Cody's mom owns it now, but it was her father. And there's quite a legacy there. And those guys raced flat track with Harley, so they've been involved with Harley for pretty much all of their lives. But aside from that, how did the connection happen with Kyle and then Travis?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much rich history there and so much legacy, not only with the motor company, but with the Wymans and the dealership and what their investment in the company. And the actual story is much, much less sexy than that. Google was the primary thing that led to us finding Kyle. But we were starting a race team and we need a rider. And I had asked around for a number of people who know a lot more about me, a lot more about racing than I knew at the time. We need to find a good rider, and we had certain criteria that we were looking for. And so I asked a number of people throughout the company, and they provided lists, and we had this big list of riders. And I sat down and started Googling all the different riders and who they were and what they meant and who could represent the brand well. And we landed on this young man who had done a few things for Harley in the past, but he had done a back to the track class when we launched the new Softail bikes in 2017, and some history with Harley-Davidson, and seemed like he represented himself well and he'd be a good representation for the brand. And we set up a phone call. Kyle had done some coaching for our vehicle dynamics group. The name originally came from Bjorn Christensen. Bjorn Christensen is the manager of the vehicle dynamics group and has been Kyle's crew chief ever since we started the program. He's been there with me, building it up from the beginning. Bjorn was familiar with Kyle and what he could do, and we set up a phone call. And I guess it's like one of those dating things. If you think back to how you date, sometimes when you talk to somebody, you know pretty quickly if it's going to be a good relationship or if it's not. And I think that we really clicked with Kyle in terms of the goals that he had for this program. And it was refreshing to hear a racer say at that time, I think this is great. I think this is going to bring so many more people into the paddock and introduce them to different styles of motorcycle riding. And we can start to break down those walls between baggers and sport bike guys. And we're already such a small group of people that participate in the sport that we all love. I don't know why we build these artificial walls in between us all the time, but how can we tear those down? And I think that if you look at the success of the class in MotoAmerica, that's one of the key things that I look at, is we're bringing tons of people to the track that wouldn't normally be there. And they're becoming fans of sport bikes, and sport bike riders are looking at Harley-Davidson and saying, hey, well, maybe there is a little performance to these bikes that I wasn't aware of. And that's a conversation we had right away. I'll tell you, the other thing that Kyle asked for in that very first conversation was for two things. At the time, he said, I still want to ride my super bike, and I want to win. Those were his only conditions. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about structure. Are you guys serious? Are you going to build a competitive bike that I can win on? And I want to keep riding super bike. I said, yep, we can make that happen. Let's go.
That's amazing. So then Travis.
Yeah. So then we went to their first race, and that was in Atlanta in 2021. And we finished second to Indian. So here's a competitor of ours that certainly that we want to beat. And our CEO at the time, our current CEO, Jochen Zeitz, as well as Bill Davidson, came down and watched that race from the sidelines. And I landed back in Milwaukee that next Monday, and there was an email that was forwarded to me from our CEO that said, what is it going to take to add a second rider? Keep in mind, we had scrambled to put together a program in just a few months. We had one bike, truly one bike. There was no other bikes available. Everything was a prototype part on the bike. We were staring at Road America happening in 5 or 6 weeks at the time. What is it going to take to add a second rider? Well, we came up with a list of what it would take and approved. So we had a second rider. We scrambled to find one. We sat down with Kyle, and I think when you think about teams forming, and that was a big part of the beginning of this project for us, was how we put together a team, a cohesive team that would work towards a common goal. And we were just getting to that point with Kyle. You could see the potential that we had in the team and the motorcycle, and we were worried about screwing up that dynamic by adding a second rider. So we sat down and we went through a list of riders. Travis was actually someone that we had talked about offline, but we wanted to make sure that Kyle was comfortable with whoever we picked that was going to be able to work together to develop the motorcycle into a race-winning motorcycle. Kyle suggested Travis. We were kind of happy to see that. Travis was just coming off a stock 1,000 victory at Atlanta and leading the points at the time. Similar to Kyle, Travis came in with just an amazing attitude. I mean, they're outstanding. Fantastic job growing up there in Northern New York. The values that those two have and the values that they bring to Harley-Davidson and how they represent the brand and how they've worked for us and pushed us as a team to be better. It's really just been a great partnership in terms of that team dynamic. And of course, they want to beat each other. You never quite know what you're going to get with brothers, but they've been extremely supportive, and I've been extremely impressed by how well that they've treated each other, the respect that they've brought to each other and the team, and helped us grow together.
It's funny too, Jason, because with Kyle and Travis, it's interesting. I mean, this is, I guess, obvious, but you really do get two different people. And by meaning that, I mean, we always talk about this, Kyle and Travis, they kind of don't look like each other, but in some ways they kind of do a little bit. They kind of don't like each other at all. They're quite different personalities, but in some ways you can see the similarities. You can tell they're brothers, but they're certainly not. If you saw them in a crowd and didn't know their names, you wouldn't necessarily pick them out. And their riding styles are different, and their way of dealing with things are different too. So probably from that perspective, you don't have like a clone of Kyle or a clone of Travis on that team. You have two different distinct people that can provide kind of distinct input on that, wouldn't you say?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think if they were standing next to each other, like you said, you wouldn't know that they were brothers.
Right.
But if you were pointed out, you say, oh, okay, yeah, I see the difference.
Yeah.
Personality, like you said, personality, totally different. Riding style, very different. Certainly that creates some challenges. How we manage as a team, Kyle, and how we manage Travis is a little bit different, but they both have the same work ethic. They both have the same attitude. They both want to win. And by riding so differently, they do provide very different input to us as a team to make that bike better. And what works for Kyle doesn't necessarily work for Travis. One of them, I could probably remove the rear brake altogether and he wouldn't even notice. The other one's on the rear brake the whole time.
Wow, is that right?
Yes, I think we joke that on Travis's bike, the brake pads will last probably multiple seasons because at most point they're not even used on the rear brake. But
that's so funny. I would have picked Travis to not use the rear brake. I don't know why, because they both flat track. But you can see,
right?
You can see Kyle's on the track. He slides that back end around. Yeah.
So it's completely different. Slowing down a 620-pound motorcycle from the speeds that we're seeing is no small task. So braking is a big portion of it, and we struggled with it. We struggled with, Travis didn't have the best race at Atlanta last year, and that was specific because we were seeing brake issues because he uses so much front brake that he used that brake higher than Travis did. We found a new limit on the motorcycle. We had to design and improve the braking system such that it would work for Travis's riding style, although it worked for Kyle's at that same race. The difference there was first and sixth place, so it's pretty dramatic when the motorcycle is right for what they need or not.
All right. Well, look, you ended up with two riders, and as it turns out, the last season showed how valuable it is to have two riders, because when one has an issue, you still have an opportunity to win. And Travis provided that late in the season when Kyle had his issue, mainly with Brainerd, which we can talk about in a second. But it obviously showed right then that having two riders was the way to go, or else you guys would have been, you would have been basically out of the picture before you even got to the last round. And as it turns out, you were right in the hunt until the race ended. So obviously the plan is you're going forward, you're having those two brothers again.
Yes.
The team's all set and ready to go. You're testing now. Before we get too far down the road on 2023 though, let's talk a little bit about 2022. And everybody's question, if we don't ask it, somebody else will. But explain to us what happened at Brainerd that ultimately led to Kyle being disqualified and not getting to race in that event, which obviously cost him a real opportunity to win the championship.
Sure. As tough as it is to admit, and we put fluid on the racetrack, and that's unacceptable for a factory team at any point in time to put any type of fluid on the racetrack. And we were upset with the penalty that was selected in terms of removing Kyle from the race. It was tough. It was tough on a personal level, but we understand it, we accept it, and we'll move on. You know, the night before, Kyle was leading in the sprint race and high-sided the motorcycle, which is the first high side on the bagger I think that we've seen, but speaks to the amount of power and torque that we're delivering to the rear wheels currently on these bikes. It's just incredible. But I was pushing hard, and we trashed the motorcycle. We had to rebuild the motorcycle overnight. Rain came in the next day, and we didn't get a chance to test that motorcycle before we went out to the race. And the repair or the rebuild for the motorcycle was not done correctly. And that's on me as the one in charge of the team to make sure that everybody is prepared, that the motorcycle is prepared, and I take responsibility for that. It's extremely difficult, and we're working as hard as we can to make sure that that never happens again, not only on our program, but how we can make sure that it doesn't happen on any Harley on the track ever again.
All right, fair enough.
So there's some unique, we'll talk about, you know, some of the unique challenges that we have on the motorcycle in particular. This one, you know, if you look at a normal sport bike, how it's designed, clutch lever in particular, a lot of the clutch cables attach to a lever on a pivot shaft that rotates the clutch inside of the motorcycle. You know, Harley-Davidson is different in that it has a wet clutch cable. So the clutch cable literally goes into a wet container that is open to oil. And when that repair wasn't done correctly and that couldn't breathe properly, it pushed oil out of the clutch line into Kyle's face, which is entirely not acceptable on any level. But it speaks to, again, kind of the unique challenges that we have prepping a motorcycle and developing a motorcycle that was never intended to be on the racetrack, let's be honest, into a motorcycle that is very capable of performing as it is on the racetrack.
Okay. Well, I know how important it is to MotoAmerica to, I mean, we believe that to make King of the Baggers have some longevity, it has to have parity, and it has to be more, you know, more people than factory Harley and factory Indian should show up at the racetrack and feel like they have a chance of a podium or a win or whatever based on their performance. Now, I know there's been some rule changes to kind of lead us down that path a little bit. And I think everybody involved was actually, from what I've heard, everybody involved was pretty much for the ideas anyway, because they all see the big picture here. And that's what I mentioned is having that parity. Tell us a little bit about the rule changes, and especially in regards to your team.
Sure. Yeah, the rule changes for 2023, we focused on a few things. So we talk about making bikes reliable, making sure that they're safe out on the track. I can tell you that, you know, as responsible for the Harley-Davidson team, I think that I'm aware, or, you know, anytime there was a failure with a Harley-Davidson, I'd go around and talk to that team and understand what problems all those teams were seeing. So when MotoAmerica asked for input into the rule package for 2023, the primary focus was to make the bikes more reliable. So I can say that every single failure that I am aware of on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, whoever was riding it, we have a rule in place where possible to enhance the requirements for the motorcycle such that those failures cannot happen again. So that was a big focus. And you'll see a lot of small changes in the rules, but focused on making the bikes more reliable. Other changes in the rules include rev limits.
Yeah, Jason, I was going to ask you about
Yeah.
that. I wanted to ask about those rev limits because I didn't understand if that's to control speed, horsepower, longevity, what the reason for that was.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple reasons. And as Paul, you stated, I think that everybody was more or less on board with the idea. I think it gets really tricky with the execution of that idea. Like what rev limits do you pick? How do you ensure that you're not over impacting one manufacturer over the other? But there's two reasons. One, from a reliability standpoint, to be able to balance the class was the second reason. And so, you know, we're significantly impacted as a Harley-Davidson team by a reduction in rev limit to 7,000 RPM for the 2026 season. Indian Motorcycles is set at a rev limit of 7,700, and that is an attempt to provide some parity and also stop the bikes from pushing to an unsafe RPM limit. If you look at stuff, you know, joked about it before, but it's not a joke that we had, you know, piston speeds in our motorcycle that were far faster than piston speeds in F1. I mean, the level of performance that we were pushing these motorcycles too is incredible. This helps rein that in a little bit. It helps everybody else that's running a Harley have a reliable package, an engine that doesn't need to be rebuilt after every weekend. They can run it for a long time.
The other question, Jason, I have for you. So I think the best analogy is to talk about what was going on with Super Sport and Super Sport Next Generation.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, we had 599cc motorcycles. And then this next generation, we've got a 955 V-twin. We've got some, this year we're going to have a 790. Well, it's an MV Agusta 800, I guess. And obviously GSXR 750s. The engine displacement is all over the place. But with you guys, one thing I've never understood is the fact that Harley-Davidson, the engine is 131 cubic inches and the Indian is only 112 cubic inches. How does that square on the racetrack?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And there are a lot of parallels to the next gen Super Sport class, and some of the rules have been put in place, and certainly moving down an RPM limit path. It kind of moves us in that direction. I think the big change still or the big difference between next gen Super Sport and baggers is that we're still a builder's class. So how do you balance a class that's also a builder's class? If you have a spec motorcycle and parts are controlled, then you can put certain controls in place. That's easier to balance a motorcycle. But key displacement is one of those. I think, similar to the origin story, the beginning of that displacement was pretty straightforward in terms of Harley had a 131 cubic inch engine that was available to the public, and Indian had a 108 cubic inch engine at the time. In that very first race, those were the displacements that were picked. And quite surprisingly, it was a very even output in terms of the race results. And that's kind of what we've stuck with. Harley, again, has a production version of 131 available. But I think, a lot of people get focused on the number and say, well, okay, 131, it's way more than 112 now for Indian. How can that possibly be balanced? But there's so much different between architecture and the engine. And I'll get a little bit technical for a minute, but I won't go too far down that line. BMEP. If you're familiar with BMEP, it's brake mean effective pressure. And it's a measure of the amount of pressure that you generate inside a cylinder in terms of an engine. And engine does work, right? And the work that it does is it pushes a piston down, ultimately turns a crankshaft in a rear wheel. Well, power is a measure of work over time. So how much power can you do in a certain amount of time? So if you look at how much output an engine can do, it really gets down to that measure of BMEP. And BMEP is driven with a few different efficiency measures, but there's thermal efficiency, volumetric efficiency, mechanical efficiency. And a certain engine of a certain design can generate a certain amount of in-cylinder pressure. That pressure is applied to an area that is the size of the piston, and it's applied to that area over a certain amount of time. That's how fast the engine can rev. So the more pressure that you can generate, the more area that you can apply that to, the size of your piston, times the amount of time that you can do that in a certain fixed amount of time will give you ultimately power. So if you look at the balance of the class, we're very similar in terms of piston diameter. So there are requirements in terms of 4,330 is the max, which is 110 millimeters, which is what Indian runs. If you run a 131 engine on a 4.5 stroke, which is the most common Harley output, you have a 4,310 bore. So our area of the piston is very similar. The rev limits are set, so the amount of times that you can do that work over a certain is fixed. And so it gets down to how much pressure you can generate inside that engine. And you will never, I won't say never, that's an absolute, but it is very hard to generate as much in-cylinder pressure on a 45-degree air-cooled motor as it is on a fully liquid motor. And that's the big difference. And so if you look at stock motors, we're a builder's class. If you look at stock Harley-Davidson Road Glide, the public numbers would result in about 143 psi, and that's how much pressure we generate on a base motor, where the Indian Challenger will generate 162 psi. So you have a big difference in the amount of pressure, similar bore, higher RPM, and that's what you're trying to balance. So it becomes what manufacturer or what engine builder participating in the class can generate more pressure inside that engine than the other. That's the challenge. So even at 7,000 RPM or 7,700 RPM, there's a significant advantage to a liquid cooled motor, to the point where we have to be, and we know this going into 2023, Harley-Davidson needs to be 7% better in terms of generating cylinder pressure at 7,000 RPM to the equivalent on a power output on 131 cubic inches as a 112 cubic inch Indian spinning 77. I know that was pretty long-winded, but it makes sense.
Well, no, it's good. And
I
BME,
told you he was smart, Sean.
yeah, BMEP. I honestly, I've never heard that before. That's interesting. I learned something on there. So let me ask you about one thing we noticed last year at Daytona when we first got there and went into the media center is who are all these people in the media center? What, we don't recognize these guys. There's a million cameras, there's equipment, there's this, that, and the other thing. And we noticed they all had some kind of Harley branding on them. And over the course of the year, we got to know them. And then I started doing these, the Q&As for the VIP, HD VIP package that you guys have. And they were around too. And they were obviously filming the whole thing. So I have two questions for you. First of all, what's with all the crazy cameras and that gigantic crew? I mean, my gosh, it was like creating a mini series. And where did the VIP package kind of originate? Was that something you guys did in conjunction with us, or kind of? That's a two-pronged question, Jason. Those two things, they tend to be a little bit intertwined because the documentary people were kind of following the VIPs quite a bit. So yeah, go ahead with that.
No, I mentioned earlier, why manufacturers, why OEMs go racing, and there's two primary reasons. One is product development, and one is marketing. If you look at marketing at Harley-Davidson, we had a bunch of cameras following us around all season last year, and we wanted to tell a brand story and what it meant to Harley-Davidson to be back and have a factory effort. And those cameras followed us around all season. I'm really excited to announce that we will be launching very soon here before Daytona. So stay tuned for details, a documentary that documents the 2022 season of the HD Screaming Eagle team. There's bits all the way back from our very first test event in Arizona back in February of last year, all the way through the finish of the season. And I think I'd encourage anybody to watch it, whether you're a fan of racing or you're a fan of Harley-Davidson or not. I think you're going to enjoy the documentary, and you'll enjoy a brand story with human interest that shows the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows. And a lot of people see the high fives and the smiley pictures when you win on Instagram or social media, but there's so much more to that in a racing environment. I think this documentary does a great job of showing that wave that you ride throughout a racing season. When things are low, they're low. When things are high, they're high. Why we're all addicted to the sport, why we all love it.
Well, we all know that that the Wymans are going to be on the factory team. What I think came as a little bit of surprise to me, and maybe Sean, I'm not sure, but we recently got the announcement about the Salomon team, and and when you delve into it a little bit, you see that they are going to be on Harley-Davidsons in the coming season when they were on Indians. Vance and Hines is back with Harley-Davidson, obviously. And there's a lot more Harley-Davidson presence on the grid than in previous years of the King of the Baggers. What brought that on? I know I've heard there's going to be some contingency. I mean, there's got to be something for those teams to want to chase, want to use a Harley-Davidson in their championship. But I think a lot of that also has to do with parts that they can get from Screaming Eagle, et cetera, that makes their bikes as close as possible to what you guys have. Is that any of that accurate?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. We have amazing customer base and amazing fans. I think that's the biggest thing in particular. And to Sean's earlier question, I encourage everybody to go to harleydavidson.com, scroll down to the HD VIP ticket package and take a look and come out to one of the races this year. And if you buy a Harley-Davidson VIP ticket package through MotoAmerica, you have special access to the track, premium parking for Harley-Davidson customers up front, bring your motorcycle in, walk to the track. You have access to the fan zone, the entire paddock, not only for King of the Baggers, but all the different classes racing out. Have a great time with your family, all weekend pass. And you also have access to the track ride, which is a parade lap around every facility. And I believe that we're going to be doing it at every racetrack that we race at this year. So for everybody down there in Daytona enjoying Harley-Davidson, get your Harley-Davidson VIP ticket package and come do a lap around the track at the International Speedway. Ride down below the banking and look up at that vertical wall. I think you'll get a whole new appreciation for what these riders do, not only in the bagger class, but certainly the 200 as well. But the team support is also a super interesting part of where we're going for 2023. And we've had a number of teams interested in running Harley-Davidsons going into next year. And those teams have reached out, and Salomon was one of those teams. They said, hey, we're interested in running Harley-Davidsons. What does that mean from a factory availability support. And one of those rule changes that we talked about earlier was MotoAmerica has actually mandated a certain amount of parts that the factories, or all teams really, have developed are available to competitors within that series. I'm happy to say that we, Harley-Davidson, are offering race-developed parts to build your motorcycle for any team that's interested. Saddlemen was one of those, so they put in order, and we're getting all their parts ready for the bikes that they are building to go compete this series. But if you're interested in any of the factory race team developed parts, you can contact raceteam@harley-davidson.com and inquire about the availability and pricing of parts. Keeping in mind that these parts are for licensed racers only, that are licensed by a sanctioning body that has Harley-Davidson racing.
Yeah, and Jason, I want to point out too, I mean, you've pointed it out as well, but Screaming Eagle, the reason it's called HD Screaming Eagle is Screaming Eagle is the performance, ultra performance, I guess, oriented side of Harley-Davidson, and it's where you guys develop these parts on the racetrack and then make them available, obviously, to teams, to people that race, but certainly also people who own performance baggers on the street. So I definitely wanted to point that out. And it's interesting that some of these teams have made the switch over. Just quickly for my education, if you can kind of do it in a nutshell, because we're getting close on time here. I noticed there's been a little bit of a transition with regard to Harley-Davidson, not as the factory, but riders that ride Harley-Davidsons in King of the Baggers. In the beginning, we saw electric glides, street glides, road glides. You guys had road glides to start with. Van Hines has road glides. I imagine that that's what Saddleman's going to have. How did it end up that there were different sort of quote models, and it kind of has now winnowed down to being the road glide model?
Yeah, I think fixed fairing. If you look at a racing bike, and the speeds that we currently see, last year we saw 170 miles an hour around the oval at Daytona. That's fast, and any amount of wind or buffeting or change in direction could upset the stability of the motorcycle. So although all Harley touring motorcycles are built on the same frame, our FL frame is the same from a Road King, a Batwing fairing, street glides, or a Road Glide. The Road Glide is more stable at that extreme speeds that we see, having a fixed fairing and not mounted to the fork. So that's why you've seen this transition. As the performance demand has increased, you'll see more and more teams switch to road glides.
Okay, so
we're happy.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say the electric glide is what you call like a Batwing fairing. It's fork mounted, is it? So that when you turn the handlebars, the fairing turns with it, but on a road glide, it's frame mounted. So when you turn the handlebars, the fairing doesn't. Is that right?
Exactly. Yep. That's the big difference between the two. Yep. But anybody racing any of those models, another announcement that I'm happy to make, and Sean, you alluded to, but contingency for 2023. And Harley-Davidson will be offering contingency again in 2023, starting at $3,000 for a first place finish, paying out all the way to 10th place with a $35,000 championship bonus. And we're going to offer that for all 14 races. That's over $185,000 in contingency that Harley-Davidson will be providing to any Harley-Davidson competitor in the King of the Baggers series in 2023. So super excited for that.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it really is. Hey, Jason, I want to ask you regarding, now that you've got more teams that are support teams, I guess, for Harley-Davidson. We see this in World Superbike, and we used to see it more in AMA Superbike and a little bit in MotoAmerica now. There is a little bit of a trickle down. So you have sort of, for you have a factory team, there's a factory team. But like, let's just say in Superbike, there is a factory Yamaha team, and then there's a few support riders or riders that also race Yamahas. And my understanding is there's a little bit of a trickle down effect, like that factory team gets parts and things before maybe some of the other teams do, or software or whatever's involved. Is there any kind of a hierarchy between, the HD Screaming Eagle team and say Saddleman and Vance and Hines and these other teams?
Well, certainly some of these teams are large teams that have made a significant investment, and we're interested in making sure that they are successful and they have access to a number of the parts, things that we've developed as a factory team. But there's no special treatment for any one team or the other. Vance and Hines still builds their own motorcycles. Saddleman is building their own motorcycles, as is every independent out there on the track. And we're offering the same level of support to all the different teams, so that the parts, that the factory parts that we've made available to Vance and Hines and Saddleman are the same parts that are available to everybody competing in the series. And we want to see everybody running a Harley-Davidson be successful.
That's a good answer. Okay, now here's one of my favorite questions that I've been wanting to ask you. And it's the last question. It's the last question I'm going to ask you, Jason. I know you're an ATV guy. I read that about you. You like to ride off road, and I'm sure you're a huge fan of the Pan America, awesome bike. And I know Kyle loves the bike, and you know, I've written some stories showing him, you know, railing around a racetrack on that bike. And I personally had some conversations with Roland Sands about the Hooligan class, because Kyle was interested in doing something with that bike. And Roland felt like, you know, if some things could be made to make it work, it would be part of it. Well, lo and behold, here we go. We've got the Pan Am short version of what that bike is named, is now homologated and will be part of the Hooligans class. Will there be those bikes on the grid this year?
Yes, there will be Harley-Davidsons on the grid in the Hooligan class. No, they are not factory supported efforts.
Okay.
Unfortunately, a lot of people look at the factory team at Harley and think, oh, this, you know, everybody wants to be part of the factory team, and you know, have an open checkbook and unlimited resources, and we have a lot of demands as a team, and a lot of the team are still volunteering their time. If you look at, you know, any given weekend, the race team that's underneath that tent, most of them there are volunteer time. They're all putting overtime to make the racing team happen. Fortunately, at this point, we just can't support a Hooligan effort as well. But we're super excited to have Harley-Davidsons out there. We wish the best of luck to the teams that are doing that are racing that motorcycle. I'm a huge fan of the Rev Max platform and the Pan America itself. Yes, I own two of them, the 2021 and the 2022, just so that I didn't have enough people to ride with me. So if I bought two bikes, I could always have a bike for somebody else to ride. So anytime you guys come to Milwaukee, go for a ride, I got a bike for you.
Oh my gosh. Wow. I'll take that invitation.
I love the motorcycle, and I wish the teams the best of luck. And certainly we're aware of, as the company, we're aware of the changes that Roland's made to the class in conjunction with MotoAmerica, and we fully support it. Anytime that we got Harley-Davidsons out there on the track, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and one thing I want to clarify. So last year in Hooligan, there were some Harleys in that class racing. They weren't the Pan Am, but this year I assume there probably are going to be Harleys and Harley Pan Ams, or is it just Harley Pan Ams, or do you not know yet?
I don't know for sure, but I believe that a number of the teams that were running the air-cooled motors, one thing that Roland's done really unique with that series is that there's kind of two championships in one, if you will. There's the air-cooled championship as well as the fully liquid-cooled championship. And you know, we've neutered the Pan Am a little bit in terms of the airbox parts that need to be installed, but the objective there was to have a cost-effective, easy way for someone to build a bike and get there around the street. And we have fully balanced classes in terms of next-gen super sport or stock 1000 for really being serious about racing. But how do we just get racing enthusiasts, not professional racers, out there on the track? And I think, you know, the recommendations that Roland's made for the Pan Am are good in that class, and we hope to see that they're successful. And I hope that people continue to run the air-cooled motors as well, because it's part of the fun of that class, is being able to get out there and be on the racetrack with the pros and mix it up and have that same experience.
Well, that's great. Listen, Jason, I think we might have left a little bit on the table, but we did cover a lot, and we definitely want to have you back on again and talk some more about this as this King of the Baggers and Harley's what their involvement in MotoAmerica in a lot of ways continues. So we'll have more to ask you about down the road, so we don't want to give it all away now, but that was a pretty thorough podcast, and really thank you so much for being on with us. We learned a lot, and it's great to hear about the motor company and what you guys are up to.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak. And, you know, I think it's great what MotoAmerica is doing. I can't believe more complimentary for you guys and how you've built the series since taking it over. And look, you've pulled the two American OEMs back into road racing in the US. Yeah, I talked about it when we won that race at MotoAmerica with Kyle in 2021. It had been 49 years since 1972 when Kehl Rayburn won an AMA Pro race at Laguna Seca. That's the last time a Harley-Davidson has won an AMA Pro race. And to be back out there in any extent, we'll take baggers for now, and who knows what the future will hold. But we're just excited as a manufacturer to be part. Wish MotoAmerica the best of luck. Excited for the season to kick off at Daytona for sure.
And by the way, that XRTT still looks pretty awesome when you look back at that race bike that Kehl rode. That's for sure.
Oh man, I want one so bad anytime.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
see one. I'm trying to get my hands on one, but
All right, boys, I got to cut you off. Jason, thanks a lot for joining us. And I don't know if a wallet suddenly opens and there's some extra money and Sean and I can be on the factory Hooligan bikes, then you know where to get us.
all right, we'll add it to the list. No problem. Yeah.
All right, thank you, sir. But you guys have a good rest of your day, and we'll catch up again soon. We'll see you at Daytona.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
guys.
See you.
Appreciate it.
All right, bye.